Hello and welcome to Strangers Stopping Strangers, podcast number 28. Thank you so much for tuning in. A big welcome back to anybody who's returning, and thanks for stopping in to anybody who's new this week. Well, this week's podcast is supersized. I get an opportunity to have a conversation with Jessie Jarnow, who is the author of Heads, a biography of psychedelic America, as well as a journalist for some just really amazing publications. I attached his website to the page, so please check it out. And we just had so much fun talking. We talk about, you know, the background of psychedelic America, how the Grateful Dead is woven into the stories, up through to music today. So lots of fun, some real rare and cool music picks that he had that are woven within the podcast. So excited for everybody to hear those selections. And finally, this is the first podcast with the new computer, so the sound sounds quite a bit better. So I'm very pleased with that. I hope you enjoy as well. So as always, feel free to drop a line, send a message, www.strangerstoppingstrangers.com. And thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Show the line and swing just places if you look at it right.
Well, Jessie, thank you so much for joining Strangers Stopping Strangers.
Cool. My pleasure, Stacey. It's nice to be here.
I'm so excited to be talking to you because, I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I'm gonna ask some questions, but I mean, you have so much information. It's incredible. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. So
awesome.
Thank you very, very much. Well, the first thing I guess I want to bring up is, I mean, you've been writing and have written for, you know, amazing publications, Rolling Stones and Pitchfork and Relics and on. But you recently published a book, and I want to tell the listeners a little bit about that, and then maybe go back to kind of how you got, you know, interested in psychedelia, and, you know, which of course brings us to the Grateful Dead, which is the, you know, the basis of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote a book called Heads, a biography of psychedelic America, which came out in early 2016. And I really wanted to write a cultural history of how the Grateful Dead had impacted the history of the United States, and kind of pulling that story back, kind of, you know, sort of pulling the camera back to get to sort of make it as big as possible. I just sort of kept coming back to the impact of psychedelics and the way that that's completely entwined with the Dead story, and sort of the way that they have sort of manifested their culture in the United States over the last half century. Those two stories are so inseparable. Sort of the arrival of the Grateful Dead and the arrival of LSD in a widespread way in the United States. And they just stayed entwined over, you know, the 30 years that the Dead were around, and now that, you know, the 20 years that Garcia's been gone. Those narratives just sort of keep winding around each other in these really unexpected, fascinating ways that stretch from, you know, art and music and cultural things, but also into science and technology and into the law and into spirituality. And it's just this big, you know, kind of ball of narrative that I wanted to kind of, you know, unspool and sort of lay out and sort of connect all these points and see how they flowed together in this bigger way. Because it was a story that I, you know, I'm younger. I only caught a couple of Dead shows at the end, so it was sort of this story that was
mysterious
kind of
to you, something that you wanted to unveil and learn more about for your.
Yeah, well, it was sort of in one way like obvious to me when I discovered all of this stuff as a teenager that you know, that all these connections existed, but because acid is illegal, a lot of the truth of the stories really end up getting buried. And I've spent, basically a couple of decades at this point trying to sort of figure out what happened.
Well, in your
And
story, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, it begins, I mean, with, it begins back in the turn of the 19th century, the early musings with mescaline and, Aldous Huxley and I mean, you really in the beginning go back to, things that predate and all the way up to current times and what's going on. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's such a fascinating story with the different characters and people, some that we know, Ken Kesey or Timothy Leary, and a lot of characters we got introduced to that you uncovered that, the regular old, the regular Joe like me had never heard of, and they were so instrumental in all of it.
Yeah, I mean, and it was kind of those sort of the characters that most people don't know, and that, when I started this book, mostly I didn't really know. And to me, it's those characters that really illustrate the story. And I was trying to kind of find different chunks of the narrative, try to talk to somebody who's involved in the actual chemistry and manufacture of LSD and talk to people who are involved in, on the street level with distribution, but also, sort of artists and writers and musicians and people who are sort of connected to that world and in both sort of intangible ways, kind of the ways they are influenced by it, but also in this real concrete way, in that it created this economic system that allowed people to support themselves in this kind of underground fashion. And sort of, yeah, like I said, kind of drawing the connections between those points. And also drawing the connections, psychedelics have obviously existed for, thousands and thousands of years. And I kind of delve a little bit into kind of the modern history of psychedelics, sort of, Native American peyote use and mushrooms in Mexico and ayahuasca in South America. And kind of these narratives, all sort of feed into this sort of, the contemporary American version, which sort of had its start almost as like a sort of a clean break or kind of like a blank slate in kind of these years after World War II, where, kind of these young Americans were discovering all these psychedelic traditions, but also kind of starting from scratch and creating new ones. And in some ways there was, sort of cultural appropriation going on and kind of this willful forgetting of what happened before, which can be...
which is so American, right?
Which is extreme.
which is so American. I'm listening. And then it turns into distribution and commerce, and then the government gets involved, and then the government denies that they're involved. And then, you start off with, again, ayahuasca in South America, where it's like shamans and part of like the religion and the culture, and then America, it turns it into, only what America can do, right?
Right, but that's also what makes the story what it is, and why I think LSD and not necessarily mushrooms or ayahuasca or peyote was really the central psychedelic that Americans latched onto, because it was invented in the 20th century and didn't have millennia of tradition behind it. It was it really was something that they could sort of project onto. And I think that plays a huge role in kind of what happened after that and sort of how the Dead developed and how, all these other kind of American psychedelic religious practices developed as well without reference to what came before.
No, absolutely. And I mean, and it is like, it's interesting because I feel like there's part of like there's a part of America who thinks like, those damn hippies but the Deadheads, like, really getting to know, a deeper dive into the Deadhead community. And I mean, even just to look at, the graphics and the pictures, I mean, it really is an American institution. I mean, really when you think about the patriotism and the identification as with our country and the music, and I mean, it's for those who really who can really wrap their mind around it. It's a very patriotic, I don't know, culture to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is in a lot of ways, and I think that's really part of, that's really connected to the dead thing specifically, because I do think psychedelics, one of the things they do or can do, there's certainly no universal, is sort of create this it's
counterculture.
Yeah, well, it's this literal countercultural sense, but also that there's this feeling that you're a citizen of the universe, that you're not connected by these boundaries, that you're connected to other people and other life forms by means that aren't, defined by governments or
higher spiritual levels.
Yeah, or something like that. Kind of like a sort of a deeper connection that goes beyond the surface of the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And writing the book was just, was an adventure, and kind of like I said, sort of learning about these characters and discovering these characters, and, like one storyline that I didn't really know anything about going into, but really managed to kind of dive into, is this scene that was in Central Park in the mid-'70s. It was this group of people who were like really early New York graffiti writers, and one of the very earliest influential New York graffiti writers, his tag was LSD Ohm. And he was this kid, Chad, from New York. And he had been, as it turned out, as I discovered, the first connection in Central Park to the people who were selling Orange Sunshine LSD, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And he kind of became this conduit between the East Coast and the West Coast, where, this acid was kind of flowing in from the West into Central Park, into this like distribution network of teenagers. And this guy, Chad, who became LSD Ohm, got out of the LSD business very, very quickly, but sort of people followed him, and that connection stayed in Central Park for the next couple of decades. And then Chad, sort of after these couple of years of working with the Brotherhood, decided that he was going to get into graffiti, and that his mission was to sort of spread the word of his people. And he really considered his people to be, the psychedelic world. And he was one of the first graffiti writers to really start taking it from people just sort of like writing their names or words on the wall to, the letters kind of starting to get abstract and surreal, and kind of turning into this, more articulated art form. And he absolutely credits, sort of the presence of acid and the presence of the counterculture for kind of being that, that transformative influence on his work. And then by extension, sort of graffiti as a whole, if you think about him as an influential figure. And they were just, and this group in the park remained this kind of like hub of countercultural activity all through the 70s and into the 80s and kind of even into the 90s, where they're kind of connecting all these threads that you wouldn't even really necessarily associate with the dead, but are kind of right there. Things like, sort of skateboarding, or I guess ultimate frisbee. I guess people connect frisbee with deadheads, but yeah.
It's like there's a full connection, because again, when you think about graffiti, the first thing that comes to my mind isn't deadheads, but as you talk, I can follow along the threads back to some roots, and that is just really fucking cool. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the thing that with the park guys in general, and sort of acid dealers throughout all of this from the 60s to now, is that they were, these guys were deadheads, but they were also kind of this connection point between all these other subcultures that were kind of engaging with psychedelics. So they were sort of the connection point between, early punk people at CBGBs who are doing acid, and they've got sort of connections to kind of like, the early hip hop scene and other things going on in New York. Certainly like, the early gay discos in New York were extremely psychedelic. So there's you kind of have this map where the dead and that psychedelic scene are at the center, but it just spits off into all these different places that are completely connected, but kind of improbable, when you start thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I've got a visual in my mind. I've got like a tree visual that's starting with a Chad as the root in a Central Park, and the branches going out, into a summer day of a tree with just, again, all kinds of unlikely leaves that you wouldn't expect, but all start at the same roots in the park,
Right.
is what's going on in my mind, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it turned into, at the other end of, the tree or the leaves or however you want to push that metaphor, you get all these, little corners. Like another one that I stumbled onto when I was writing the book is Keith Haring, the late great pop artist, was a massive, massive deadhead and acid freak when he was a teenager in the 70s. And his first real art that he sold was a Dead bootleg shirt. It was a steal your face with kind of his sort of distinct sort of squiggly lines kind of in the space behind the skull. And, he sort of passed through the Dead world and the psychedelic world and ends up in New York and becomes this really influential artist. And whenever he was asked about sort of like, where where kind of these ideas come from, he would trace it back to this, like, he's like, oh yeah, my second acid trip out in the fields when I was, a teenager. I had my notebook and I was tripping and just started drawing in my notebook, and that was the basis for like every single thing I did that followed. So it's, it reaches into, these characters that are known around the world at this point. And he was just a random deadhead acid taker out in Pennsylvania, and
right.
That's what happens.
Expanded your mind and then expanded art and expanded our world. The ripple effect, the ripple in still water, and on
exactly.
It goes. Well, in bringing up ripple makes me bring up music, which will bring me into Jerry Garcia, and on the podcast typically, there is, no format to these podcasts. It's strangers stopping strangers just to shake their hand. It's so much fun for me to get to meet all different kinds of people from all walks of life, from, the suit and tie deadheads to the couch touring teenagers to people like yourself who've just, so involved in meeting so many different amazing people and stories. And the commonality is, just this love for the music and the meaning and the meaningfulness it has to our lives every day, depending on if you saw 500 Dead shows with Jerry or, you're 18 and stumbled upon a couch tour and you're just digging the music. So I like to mix in music. So I asked you to select some songs. And so this is going to be a podcast where the songs are not shows you saw, but really meaningful, pieces of music to you. So let's do a little music. So tell me a little bit about our first pick. The first pick I had never heard before. It's phenomenal. It's going to be so cool for you guys to listen to. And this goes back to 1962. So tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this is from a really recently discovered tape by the Hart Valley Drifters, which was one of Jerry Garcia's bluegrass bands when he was living in the Palo Alto area after he got out of the Army, but before he picked up an electric guitar. He was a banjo player and a guitarist and a real folk music purist at that point. And this is one of his early bands. It features Robert Hunter on bass, and David Nelson, who went on to co-found the New Riders of the Purple Sage, is in this band as well. And there's a bunch of tapes, really kind of a surprisingly large amount of tapes of Garcia's various bluegrass and old-timey projects from that era. But this is his first known studio session, which was a radio session at Stanford University with this band. So it's definitely the highest quality that of the bluegrass stuff that exists. And it was discovered by a filmmaker named Brian Mixis, who also wrote the liner notes for it. It's just an incredible document of where Garcia and Hunter and Nelson were at that point. And Jerry plays banjo on about half the tunes and guitar on about half the songs and sings lead on almost all of them, which is actually kind of sort of rare for that period of Garcia stuff. He's not usually such a dominant lead vocalist. And this is I think it's the last track on the album. It's Sitting on Top of the World, which the Dead picked up and put in their repertoire when they went electric in 65 and 66. But this is just a two-person version. I think Ken Frankel is playing the dobro, and I don't think Jerry is playing any instrument at all. I think he's just singing on this. And he's kind of on a lot of this album, you can tell that it's Jerry, but he clearly hasn't totally figured out how to fully sing yet in that voice that we would all really identify.
It's kind of shy. It's I don't know if shy is the right word, but it's very innocent. Maybe.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, not shy, but it's very innocent. I have to be honest, the first time I'd heard it, and it's very sweet and very innocent and very distinctively his voice, but not really his style, but really beautiful. And
it's really
like a little ditty, It's just a little piece of music.
Yeah, it's the sound of him sort of discovering his voice, literally in that sense, and that's. A couple of the other tracks here highlight that as well. But that's something that I, is really important to me about Garcia is his vocals and his singing as much as his guitar playing and his jamming and his songwriting. But his voice is something that I find to be really, really special and magical. And to me, this is kind of like the first historical moment where that's happening.
Well, let's listen to it, and I would bet that this is going to be the first time that we are introducing this to many of the listeners. So thank you on behalf of anyone listening who hasn't had a chance to hear this. And
I'll add that this was just officially released a few months ago on a CD called, is it Folk Time? I think, let me make sure that's right.
Yeah, Folk Time. I put a couple of notes. Hart Valley Drifters Folk Time, Sitting on Top of the World, Sessions from Stanford, KZSU, 1962, Jerry's first known studio. That's the notes.
Cool.
That's the notes. That's the notes. This is red information, so definitely worth looking at the whole thing. And it was on YouTube, so it's readily available to find. So all right, well, let's go into that, and then we're going to come back and hear a little bit more. And we have a few more cool songs. And usually I edit the songs and then do a companion guide. These songs are. They're not long jams, so I'm going to play the whole songs, and then I'll still roll out the companion for people who just want to hear music too. So everybody enjoy.
It's a pretty song called Sitting on Top of the World. Summer's day, my baby left me. She went away. Now she's gone, but I don't worry. No, I'm sitting on top of the world. River, so big and wide, blonde-headed woman on the other side. Now she's gone, but I don't worry. You know I'm sitting on top of the world. Summer, spring and fall, blonde-headed woman is the cause of it all. Now she's gone, but I don't worry. You know I'm sitting on top of the world. holding out your hand. You're my woman, you know I'll be your man. But if you go, then I won't worry. Baby, I'm sitting on top of the world. Was in the spring, on summer's day, my baby left me, she went away. Now she's gone, but I don't worry. You know I'm sitting on top of the world.
Well, back from listening to Jerry Garcia's beautiful Sitting on Top of the World, and I'm sure many of you are smiling out there and racing to your computer to YouTube and listen to more of Folk Time. So I want to ask you, Jessie, tell me, I want to hear a little bit about you. I want to talk a little bit more about the books and your writings, but, about you and what your family and inspired us. I want to know, where did you come from?
Yeah, well, I grew up on Long Island, mainly, I was born in the late 70s, so I growing up in the 80s and the early 90s, and my parents are both counterculturalists, I guess I would say. My dad's probably more of a head than my mom, but, grew up with an amazing record collection in the house and just two music-loving parents, playing stuff from it constantly. That said, the Dead weren't really in that record collection. It was pretty much every Beatles record and every Dylan record and every Stones record and there's some great free jazz in there and all kinds of things that I, kept discovering, well into my college years. Like, oh my God, why do you have that record?
Right.
But they had a copy of Skull and Roses in there. And I guess, sometime probably in I guess for me it was 7th or 8th grade, might have even been younger than that. There was kind of this wave of sort of jammier bands that were kind of coming into the world. Fish and Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors were real big at that point. And I would read about these bands, and they would, and I got into a bunch of them, and a lot of the news stories about them would reference the Grateful Dead, and I started listening to the Dead kind of through that in this weird backwards way, and
like an investigative roots sort of situation.
Yeah, and I think pretty quickly bought Working Man's Dead and American Beauty at a garage sale on vinyl. This is all on vinyl. And fell in love with those albums, not that hard to do that. And started buying Grateful Dead related magazines, actually. Like I said, I grew up on Long Island, which I didn't really realize at the time, and didn't even really put it together until later, how densely Long Island is packed with Deadheads compared to the rest of the country. And because of that, the record store in my town only stocked one magazine for sale, and that one magazine was Relics. So I, would buy Relics at this place in my town, and started just from kind of reading Relics, kind of put together the fact that there's this whole kind of tape culture going on where people were exchanging these tapes. So I started trading tapes through the ads in Relics, and I would pick up Dupree's Diamond News, and there's another one called Unbroken Chain, which was out of Virginia, and built up this kind of little tape collection, and got online as well through CompuServe, and built up just started getting shows from the 60s and 70s and discovering that really sort of magical, glowing early Grateful Dead sound. and there was, the Grateful Dead Hour was on every week, and WBAI, had great, especially then, this great public radio, or non-commercial radio station had an amazing reach and broadcast out to Long Island perfectly clearly. And every week they had this show, still have the show, it's still on, called Morning Dew, where they would broadcast entire Dead sets, like a whole hour and a half soundboard with like a break at the 45-minute mark, so people at home could flip their cassettes. and they would have these marathons where they would play, it was a fundraising marathon, so they would play like 6 or 7 hours of Dead in like 45-minute increments, and then, at the side flip they would come on and, ask for more money to support the radio station. So I would, I was 15 or something, and I would stay up all night in my parents' living room just taping this stuff off the radio, and built up this great little collection. And some of those shows are still ones I listen to frequently. So I've certainly upgraded since then. But then this was all happening probably like 1992 to 1994, 94, I guess, because in 1994. I saw 2 Grateful Dead shows. I'd been listening to them a bunch, and I was like, I guess I was 15 or 16. I'm not great with math. And I
mid-90s, mid-teens.
Yeah, and with
mid-90s. It was in the early to mid-90s, and you were in your mid-teens.
Yeah, and went to see the Dead at NASA Coliseum in March 94, March 23rd, 94 was my first show. And having had listened to tapes for, kind of almost 2 years at that point, I kind of thought the show really wasn't that good, and I was not that into it. I really enjoyed, like, I had a great time, like, it was super, super fun, but the music just didn't quite grab me the same way that those tapes did. There's something going on that I couldn't put my finger on as a teenager yet. Other than that, it wasn't the same thing as what was going on these tapes that had really enchanted me.
And looking back in retrospect, there's so many reasons for
exactly.
it, right? I mean, now looking back at the size of the crowd, what was happening on the East Coast, Jerry's health, there's as opposed to, the fresh psychedelic-induced young bucks in San Francisco,
right.
In the early 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
And totally different scene.
And I saw another show in the fall and had the same reaction, like, this is fun, but it's, and I love the Grateful Dead, but I'm not sure this is really connecting with me. And they were both amazing experiences separate from the music. Like I wasn't, I was a mid-teen. I hadn't really gotten into psychedelics at that point, or even smoking pot. But just the experience of being in these giant rooms with the Dead, and more importantly, the Deadheads, was kind of what was really the lasting impression it made on me. Was like, my main memory of those shows was that the crowd was singing along louder than the band. Like,
sure.
And my second show was at Madison Square Garden, and I got to experience a Shakedown Street opener at Madison Square Garden, and I definitely that moment of them, the doom chord dropping in at the beginning is something that's still very vivid with me, and sort of feeling the room erupt. But those 2 shows, I didn't hop on the bus in the way that some people did, and go out and see tons of shows. Like, summer 95 rolled around, and I was like, maybe I'll see him next year or something. And I was still trading tapes. It wasn't like I had lost my taste for any of that. But Fish was around, and I was into lots of other music besides just jammy stuff. I was way into the band Sonic Youth, who I still love, and they were kind of my doorway into kind of experimental improvisation. So I was kind of discovering all this stuff at the same time as a teenager, and the Dead were just sort of like part of that, and a really important part of that for sure, because they they plugged into all these these other things. Like, they were sort of a path into sort of old American folk music, but they also connected to experimental music in the same way that Sonic Youth did, or at least that, the 60s and 70s Dead stuff did for me. But that was sort of the beginning for me. And then at some, got really fully online at some point around there and started connecting with more Deadheads. Reading Skeleton Key by Steve Silberman and David Schenck was actually a really influential Deadhead moment for me. That was maybe I think when I like normalized as a Deadhead, was reading that book, which I can still quote kind of chapter and verse. Like, there are definitely passages out of Skeleton Key that I know by heart. And that book really kind of like defines what the Grateful Dead world was and is for me. And I highly recommend that.
No, I have not read that.
Oh, it's so fun. It's just an A to Z dictionary of the Dead and Deadhead culture. So you get all these like entries about what was going on tour and kind of like tour slang and like,
Oh, that's so
there's like an entry for like the Gorby blots, like these, this acid with Gorbachev on them. And, and like, but also things like song abbreviations and
sure.
My
the vernaculars that you kind of pick up, like a key. That's Skeleton Key.
And also like a real sensibility like that. My favorite entry in the whole book is it's all alphabetized, so it's like a dictionary. So my favorite entry is under Y, and the entry is for your hands. And the definition just says, look at them. Weird, huh? So there's this real, like, it's like there's a sense of humor about it and kind of this absurdity that I think I really connected to as well. And just finding other people with that sense of humor or that, that same bent on the world.
Well, in those first books that you read, I mean, for me, I think back, I had 2 books, and it's so cool because I've recently met and actually had lunch with Geraldine Brandeis when I was out in California. We had crepes on Haight Street, which is, I mean, again, like so cool, right? To just, get to meet all these people that were, part of my teenage years and formative years, and her book, The Family Album.
Oh, yeah.
Which I remember getting, and her and I talked, and it came out it was like Christmas '89, and it was like a really big, Christmas Hanukkah gift, and I'm like, I was one of the people, who got it for Hanukkah that year. Like I remember that book, and the Grateful Dead Handbook was the other one that I go back to my years that had like had the 100 Dead songs and had like some quizzes and had the Fire on the Mountain story and. Yeah, I can go back and like visualize it all like written in and then written over and then erased, and it's so fun because it's it just is your tapestry.
Yeah, I didn't have the handbook. I definitely had the Family Album and still have it. I'm looking at it right now on my Dead bookshelf. But yeah, that was an entry point, and there were so many great books around the Dead and connected to the Dead. Pretty quickly after I got into the Dead, I wound up, reading Tom Wolfe's The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which, is incredible in its own right. Now, my dad had also given me a copy of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, so the Dead, like, kind of connect pretty
permeated
swiftly into sort of the literary world around them in a way that really emphasized for me that they weren't just a rock band, that they were sort of, there are these tendrils that connect to all these other practices and forms of creativity and parts of culture or whatever. And that was an important lesson as well, was sort of knowing that there was more than just these guys on stage playing instruments, that it was part of this bigger thing.
Well, let's play some music.
Yeah.
Now I want to hear a little music and talking about them. I always say this. You chose. I didn't choose anything. We chose, and you sent to me the Jerry Garcia and Phil Lesh Wandering Man demo.
Yeah.
Tell everyone a little bit about this pick, and then we're going to go in and play it.
Sure. I'll say that one of the things that I love about the Grateful Dead is just how much of it there is, and I mean that both in terms of just real quantity, but also variety stuff, and the fact that here we are 50 years later, from when they started, and there's still kind of new pieces that are surfacing and new discoveries to be made and tapes that nobody's heard before. And this tape is one that surfaced last year, kind of over the summer. There were sort of a bunch of rehearsal tapes that floated into the BitTorrent universe, including this one that there's no real accurate dating, but my hunch, based on some of the sort of just what it sounds like and the context of it, is that it was recorded in LA in early 1966 when the Dead moved down there with Owsley Stanley and moved into a house together where Owsley was tabbing up acid, up in the attic, and the Dead were rehearsing downstairs with kind of the early sound system that he had built for them. And he had also bought a tape machine to record them, which is the source of a lot of the early live Dead recordings that we have, including the one that just got released as a bonus disc with the reissue of the self-titled album. There's a tape from '66. So we have this tape machine, and this session is basically Phil and Jerry messing around with the tape machine and writing the song. Like there's, I edited down the one I sent you, but you can hear them messing around with like the placement of the microphone and sort of figuring out how to use this thing as a new piece of gear. And actually, I think Bobby is on this track as well, but I think he's sitting a little bit further away from the microphone, so you can only kind of like hear his voice in a ghostly way. But this is a song that, as far as I know, the Dead, never played live, or if they did, doesn't exist on any of the tapes that currently circulate. And it's just this really beautiful little tune that, I'm guessing Phil and Jerry wrote it. I Googled around for the lyrics and couldn't find anything indicating that it was a cover song. So this is kind of like one of their really earliest attempts at songwriting. And I think Phil's voice sounds really sweet in this way that he never quite tapped into in that same way again. And it's just, another side of the Dead. And I love that, I've been listening to the Dead for 20 years, more than 20 years at this point, and fairly obsessively at that. I've
So to stumble upon a new gem is it's
pretty mind blowing. Like
absolutely. I have never heard this one again. So this is listeners to Stranger Stopping Strangers, we will blow your mind again because you probably have never heard this, and I will make this little hidden gem companion only guide so you can listen to the music over and over. And I might even send you a link if somebody emails me directly to it if you want something solo. So I'm excited that you're sharing this. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Because the music should be shared, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
it's
and I guess I like sort of broadening the definition of what the Grateful Dead were. Obviously, people trade tons and tons of live tapes and and live recordings, and I'm certainly no stranger to that. But there's so much other stuff that they've created, that doesn't fall into the category of just like here's a sweet jam from a live show, because they were serious musicians and their output was really wide and wild, and it's cool to kind of like reconsider the context of some of those things, because the context of the Grateful Dead is so tied up with this giant band that toured the country for years. To have this like little moment of just like Jerry and Phil and I think Bobby sitting around in a living room is like to me this whole it makes me think about the Dead in lots of different ways, in new ways. So that's some of the appeal for me.
Absolutely, and what comes to mind to me is in this last bit of conversation, it's the ultimate juxtaposition to Shakedown at Madison Square Garden. Because
totally.
For a minute there, I was like, well, maybe we should just play Shakedown from Madison Square Garden. Like I was gonna offer that up, and then we kept talking, and now I was like, well, let's mix it up and let's just put that in, and now in full circle, them in 1966 in Los Angeles, discovering their roots. It is I mean, because it's everything all together. But I'm thrilled that you picked this and shared this, because I think that the overall listeners, they show up for the Madison Square Garden Shakedown Street, but this is something new. So it gives more breadth and depth and texture. So
yeah.
I think that's what you were going for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
that's my interpretation of it.
The Grateful Dead that I really value is kind of there's an intimacy to it that I think maybe got lost somewhat a little bit later on, but I think is really very present here.
Well, let's go into it, and then we will back with a little more chat and a couple more very specially selected songs.
Oh, wandering man's gonna find you someday. You'll meet him in old Lonesome Road. You'll tell him the reasons you're running away from past lives of love. But you're trying to accomplish and stop by the people who misunderstood. Your house in other than sweat and mud. You kept patience with faith in them. Tormented still, you saw the lies. Punished still, you looked all around. Hated still, you packed and covered. Punished still, you left your small town.
Well, back from listening to that little 1966 jam, and I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you and talk about and have you share. So tell me. So you're writing. I was looking at some of the your bios, and again, like Rolling Stone and Relics and Pitchfork, and you're actively writing about so many different topics, on a regular basis. So tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I've been a full-time freelance writer for, I guess, 15 years at this point, more than that, and was writing pretty obsessively kind of since the first time I really figured out how to string words together on paper in like first or second grade or something. Like I started making zines on a Xerox machine and wrote and edited the school paper, and writing has always been my main obsession along with music. So it was kind of a fairly natural thing to start writing about both of those things together. And yeah, I think partly influenced in a way by the Dead, kind of got into writing about all kinds of different stuff over the years. Certainly I do write a lot about music, and I write about psychedelics. But I also write about, technology and occasionally politics and sort of the connection points between all of these things, and just kind of follow what I think are interesting stories that I don't think anybody else is really covering. That's kind of a rule of thumb for when I'm writing, is trying to find the stories that I don't have to compete with other writers to get. Like, I don't want to be writing, the same story that, is appearing in 20 other ways in 20 other publications. Though sometimes I do get assignments that end up being like that. But mainly what interests me is kind of finding these stories that nobody else is telling, and can lead me into all kinds of different places. I guess one, interviewing a guy who I find really interesting, who still makes his living selling used CDs. That's, something that fascinates me. Or I started writing for Wired recently, and like one thing that I've been fascinated with for years is voice transcription, and why, as a writer, why isn't there, an application where I can just, feed in an interview recording and have the computer spit out like a transcription? Like, why do I have to listen back and type everything up?
They don't have that? I mean, they have that on my recording on my cell phone.
Well, but
right?
they have one voice recording. You can dictate, but you can't if you fed at this recording of the two of us talking into that, most of it would come out as gibberish. Because that is kind of the missing piece. And so I kind of interviewed a bunch of people who've been developing voice transcription technology at Microsoft and elsewhere, and just sort of gave myself a crash course in that. And just sort of kind of keep following what seems interesting to me. And continuing to write about the Dead and continuing to write about music, as well. But just sort of following the path of most resistance, I guess, in some ways.
Well, I think if you bring out things that you're interested in when it comes to sharing concepts and ideas, then you become less of a talking head, no pun intended, so to speak, and an editorial slant on a common topic, and you're more offering, information on a topic that wouldn't otherwise, be offered. So you become less editorial. I mean, that's for stories that multiple people are covering on things. I think that's kind of the as a reader, that's one of the biggest issues I have with, again, you thinking about politics is the first to come to mind. You're getting one person's perspective, and if you're coming up with interesting different things, you're exposing different ideas.
Yeah, and that's certainly part of it. There's lots and lots of people writing about music, and it's there's part of writing about music is kind of this notion of reviewing albums and
it's being a critic. It doesn't sound like you're looking to be a critic. You want to be more of a storyteller than a critic.
Yeah, well, it's at some point that became less interesting to me.
Sure.
Where it was more for me, it was kind of more like a practical matter. It was there's so much music out there, and just infinite amounts of stuff to discover in every era, but also just infinite amounts of music just existing in this current present moment. that to spend my time writing about music that I don't like or don't find interesting is really just like a kind of a waste of time in that sense, for me. Like, that's not what I got into this for. Like, that's not, that's not where my passion is. My passion is finding new stuff that I didn't know about before and is really, really cool. And so I've kind of, at sort of a certain point, became less interested, sort of like what you were saying, less interested in criticism in that traditional, this is good, this is bad kind of way, and more interested in
hey, check this out.
Yeah, and check this out.
Look what I learned. Check this out. This is so cool. Did you know this? Like, I'm gonna expose something new out there.
Yeah, something like that. And that sort of that kind of applies to a lot of the different projects that I have.
Well, right on. Well, let's play another song, and then I want to ask you a couple more questions about like what we think is going on like now, in the future. So let's because it's just the wheel keeps on spinning. So the next song that you picked out is another one I have not heard, which I was really thrilled and delighted to hear. And it's called A Beautiful Jam. So tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is probably the most, I guess, traditional of the picks I'm going to make. It's an excerpt from The Dead at the Capitol Theater, the first night of their, I think it was a 6-night run, the long run in February '71, where they debuted tons of new songs. And this jam actually comes out of the first ever version of Wharf Rat. It was from Dark Star into Wharf Rat, back into Dark Star, and this piece of music is sort of the improvised piece in between Wharf Rat and the second part of Dark Star. And it was released on the So Many Roads box set a bunch of years ago, which I think absolutely holds up as like a really great, fairly, relatively brief 5-disc introduction to the Dead. But what really makes this jam special, and I only figured this part out a few years after falling in love with the piece of music by itself, is that it features Ned Legion on clavichord, who most Deadheads, if they know who he is at all, know Ned as Phil Lesh's collaborator and partner on Sea Stones, which is this sort of noisy avant-garde album that got put out in 1975 during the Dead's hiatus year, and Phil and Ned would play Sea Stone sets during kind of before the second set at Dead shows throughout 1974 during the Wall of Sound era. And those sets were really noisy and really, really combative. And not for everybody. I happen to love that stuff, but I can totally, I can see how that's not a thing that some Deadheads are into. And because of that, I think a lot of people really associate Ned with this, crazy, almost violent sometimes music. But Ned also played with the Dead a whole bunch of other times in those years. And oftentimes he would be playing keyboards on the really gorgeous songs. He would come out for Dark Star and he would come out for the other one. And he would play this really consonant, beautiful music, like for example, this Beautiful Jam. And when I wrote my book, I got to spend some time with Ned in California, and he's really kind of he's an amazing guy and a really smart guy. And, he told me that, Sea Stones and the noisy stuff is very much part of him, but that, in a lot of ways, was what Phil wanted to do. That was sort of how Phil wanted to express himself, by making this avant-garde music. And for Ned, he was just as into making pretty stuff and sort of engaging in sort of the more melodic things. So the Beautiful Jam, I think, is an example of Ned's part in the Dead world and sort of quiet little influence on the Dead world, where he would come out on stage and they would sort of veer into these more like intimate little dialogues. And I just love the way the clavichord fits in with this stuff. It's really kind of unlike any other piece of thematic Dead improv that they ever did. It's just sort of this one time only, like, little piece of music that they made. And I love it.
Well, it's very beautiful, and I'm excited to share it. And it is very melodic and sweet and kind of ethereal.
Yeah.
So definitely not what I would associate with like headbanging, like very ethereal and cool. Well, I'm going to play this, and then we will come back, and we'll chat a little more, and we've got 2 more songs to share with you. So everybody enjoy. Well, back from listening to the beautiful jam, literally a beautiful jam, and I want to talk a little bit about, you know, like what's going on now. And I mean, there's such a great, vibrant music scene. You live in New York, and you and I first connected via Twitter around the Dead and Company show. Somehow we were both going to be there, and we ended up like messaging and talking. So, tell me what your thoughts are on, you know, what's unfolding for the newer generations with the music.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's always a vibrant music scene. That's one of this great ongoing things for the last half century or longer in this country, and one thing that I've really been excited about over the last few years is it just seems like kind of these boundaries that were, you know, kind of always imaginary are kind of beginning to really fall away. When I was in high school and college, there was this extremely sharp divide between kind of the Deadhead world and like the indie rock world or sort of the avant-garde world or these other parts of the music scene where I felt a little conflicted, like where, you know, I was way into the Grateful Dead, but I was also way, like I said before, way into these bands like, you know, Sonic Youth and kind of the sort of the spin-offs and kind of the world that was going on in New York and sort of people, you know, experimenting with 4-track tapes and doing things that were sort of more lo-fi. And it seemed like the people that I knew that really liked that kind of music were you know, oftentimes sort of scorned the Dead and sort of were not into sort of the hippier, jammier world. And I think the last little while, I think those lines have really fallen away where now it's not at all uncommon to sort of cross paths with people who are into all of that stuff. And I think more importantly, the way that's manifesting is kind of all this music that sort of falls in between those two categories, if you even want to categorize those things, where there's these musicians who kind of draw a lot from, you know, say the Velvet Underground and bands like that, but also aren't afraid to sort of engage in sort of Americana and longer jams. You know, I mean, the Velvet Underground certainly jammed too, but that was not a hip thing for a long time. But yeah, there's this whole new wave of guitarists of people like William Tyler and Steve Gunn and Chris Forsyth, and Riley Walker, and the list just sort of keeps going, where the music that they make is kind of not really in one category or the other. And I think that's certainly like the little corner of the music world that I'm in. But my impression is that that those boundaries are kind of falling, you know, kind of between any two genres that were separated in the 80s or 90s, you know, of music. It's now kind of this one flowing thing. And I certainly would think that the sort of the internet and social media and just sort of the spread of music, the digital spread of music and access to music, I think probably has a lot to do with that. Just that there's, you know, all this stuff is easy to get to now, and
well, you can try something without really having to fully commit to it as much.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
you can download a song, you can do a Spotify list, you can check out, you know, singles a lot easier now than you could before, when it was, you know, really were you going to spend $12 or $15 on an album or on a tape, and then you had all the tracks. You know, the way music is being presented and listened to is definitely different now.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the same holds true for the Dead, where, you know, in the 80s or 90s, if you wanted to hear a Dead tape, if you wanted to hear, you know, 827.72 or 214.70 or, you know, one of these legendary Dead shows, the way that you had to do that was to pretty much, you had to know a Deadhead. You had to know somebody who had the tapes. And now that added immeasurably to the culture, to the Deadhead culture, for the fact that it was kind of internalized.
It was an exclusivity, you know. It was more of like a private club in that way.
Yeah,
and
I think
ownership of music.
Yeah, and that really gave it a lot of its power. But I think one of the great things that's happened in the last bunch of years is that music has then become accessible where you don't have to go through that mediation to get the tape. You can just go directly, you can go to archive.org and listen to it, or go to YouTube or something. And the fact that you can bypass and you don't have to be a member of the subculture or the counterculture, I think has been a way that a doorway into the music for a lot of people, and has sort of, I think, led to this acceptance kind of over the last decade that the Dead really were and are this incredibly huge force in American music. I think there was a lot of denial about that for a while.
Well, and maybe misconception too, people not knowing really what it is. And I know that, like, if I'm introducing people to the Dead, I mean, there's definitely certain things that I find for entry level getting to know. I mean, actually, my kids. I mean, I'm a mom. I've got a 7-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and so, of course, as a good parent, I'm trying to constantly, drill music into their head, and they like some other stuff, and I think as long as you love music, and that's important. But I want them to love my music, because that's just that's just human nature, and but there's certain songs that I'll go through that are you can get to, again, on a Spotify list, on org, listen to this one, listen to that one, listen to this one, and get people on board based on what's the easiest digestion,
Yeah.
My favorite game that I play with my daughter now, I will plug with this, it's so cute. And again, I think she does it more just to humor me. I don't want to be any I'm the perfect mom, situation here on the podcast. But she did ask to play it last night because she knows it makes me happy. I'll go through a playlist and we'll guess who's singing. So we'll do the Bob song and the Jerry song, and that's very rewarding and fun, when you go through and say, and then a Brent song or a Phil song will come on, and to her credit, she kind of looks confused, and I'm
right.
like, yeah, no, you don't know that one, but the accessibility, again, to your point, it makes it so much easier to be able to, turn people on to specific things and feed them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like a mother bird, a mother bird chewing up the food and spitting it into her mouth, with I'll throw you an easy one, there's I don't know, a war frat for Jerry, or a victim of the crime for Bob, there's some okay, there's no fucking this one up, kid. Come on,
Right.
Anyways, yeah, you get a Brenton, or you get a Jack Straw, and she just gets really confused. I'm like, well, they're all singing. I don't know. Sorry, honey, about that one. Well, we have 2 more songs, so let's do another song. Then let's come back and we'll do a little sign off goodbye, and then I'll leave with the last song.
Sure.
So the last 2, because I definitely want to play all of these songs, was where we're going chronological, is a Jerry Garcia song where he's on the piano and the vocals, which is kind of amazing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, this is from the All Good Things box set, which is a really super cool box set of Garcia's solo albums with lots of outtakes and demos and things. And this is unusual even among that, where this was recorded, I think it was maybe possibly even the first thing recorded at Front Street, at Club Front, which was the Dead sort of studio rehearsal space.
They call it in San Rafael.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this was, I think, setting up for the sessions for Cats Under the Stars. And this is a cover of Warren Zevon's "Accidentally Like a Martyr." And Jerry's playing Rhodes. He's playing piano. He's playing the keyboard. And Steve Parrish, his roadie, is playing drums. And Bob Matthews is it Bob Matthews or Harry Popick? One of the sound guys, one of the sound crew is playing bass. I think it's Bob Matthews. And there's a ton of reasons I love this. One, it's just a beautiful interpretation of this song. I like Warren Zevon okay, and I love this song, but Zevon's version is kind of really filled with bluster. And this is I keep using this word, but it's really intimate, and it's that very sort of quiet Garcia mode that I love so much, and it's just this great interpretation of it. And I love the fact that Jerry's playing piano, which is something he didn't do very often. There's like one show from 1970 where he plays piano on like To Lay Me Down or something like that, and he plays a little piano on his first solo record, and there were a couple other scattered instances of it. And the Dead are so often associated with being sort of, these crazy musician virtuosos, the double drumming, the fact that, Phil Lesh was an avant-garde composer before he was in the Dead, Bob Weir playing all these weird, sort of chord shapes. And I really like that this is kind of this primitive stripped back version of that. There's nothing flashy, nobody takes a guitar solo. There's no crazy drum fills. It's really just serving the song in this very pure, simple way. It's a performance. And I love it. It's great. It's one of my favorite, it's one of my favorite late night listens. And it's just, Garcia just sounds so vulnerable in a way that, he doesn't often, I think. And I think that has a lot to do with the lyric.
Yeah, no, it's really beautiful, and it was the first time that I have ever heard Jerry on the piano. So it was, I listened to it, and then I was, reading up on it, and I was like, oh my, wow, that's, yeah, learn something new every day. Totally cool. Yeah, I have it from August of '77.
Yeah.
So that is, and Front Street, I got a chance to pop by there when I was out at Terrapin.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, no, and we met a guy. We're kind of running long, but I got to tell you this little quick story because it's such a cool story, and I want to do a little shout out to Two Sticks. We met, and then I saw him at the Sweetwater over Christmas. It's one of those cool serendipitous everything happens around that way. But he was standing outside smoking a joint and told me that Front Street was around the corner and we should check it out. And we were kind of looking to walk over there, and it wasn't going to happen. And so we're leaving, and he has a couple of devices to help him walk. And he said if we gave him a ride back to his apartment, he would swing us by. Me and my one of my oldest friends that lives in the area. So he said they used to be called Shakedown Street. That was the original shakedown. That the feds would be shaken down on either side at 420 Front Street. So, and then my same friend from California and I were at the Sweetwater seeing Steve Kamuk at the 30th, and he was there, and he was he was there, and he was tripping. He's like, it was the coolest, it was the coolest thing, running into him in the very front, with
nice.
It was just again one of those really random, hey.
Yeah, and also if you're ever back over there, kind of near Front Street as well, is Fifth and Lincoln, which was the Dead's office. It was it's a little house that they got. I think they got it in 70 or 71 or something like that. I'm not totally sure, but that was the main Grateful Dead office from then in the early 70s all the way until after after Jerry died. They didn't move out until then. And then just down the block, I can't remember if it was on Fifth or Lincoln, was the ticketing office where Yeah,
I remember the PO box, because you'd send the letters, you'd send your for the lottery tickets, and then you would decorate the envelopes and the PO box in San Rafael. That was a
So their offices were on this nice little cute street, and then Front Street, where the rehearsal space was, is over in kind of the sketchier, seedier part of town, mm-hmm. where the cover of Shakedown Street, the album, sort of looks like the area where Front Street is. If anyone's looking for a visual.
Yeah, no, very warehousey and cool, and maybe I'll put a picture of it up when I promote this podcast. I always get a couple of pictures,
sure,
and I'll put one of us up there that Two Sticks took of us. We were out there, super fun. Well, let's play. So here we are back there, and full circle. So we are going to play the song, and then we're going to come back and do a little goodbye, and then we got one more song we'll do as the send off, because I could just talk to you forever, but I'm sure you have things to do, and good things come to an end. So everyone enjoy, and then we'll be right back.
don't ring, and the sun refused to shine. Never thought that I would be so dearly for what was already mine. For such a long, long time we made mad love, shadow love, random love, and abandoned love. Accidentally, like a martyr. The hurt gets worse and the heart gets harder. We made mad love, shadow love, random love, and abandoned love. Accidentally, like a martyr. Gets worse and the heart gets harder. Such a long, long time. Time out of mind. We made mad love, shadow love, random love, and abandoned love. Accidentally, like a martyr. Gets worse and the heart gets harder. We made mad love, shadow love, random love, and abandoned love. Accidentally, like a martyr. The hurt gets worse, the heart gets harder. We made mad love, shadow love, random love, and abandoned love. Accidentally, like a martyr. The hurt gets worse, the heart gets harder.
I'm going to say a little goodbye, and then we're gonna play one last song, but I'm going to play this as after we are done talking. So we will say our goodbyes and then play this. And I am going to put a couple links onto the website because I'm sure everybody would like to know more about where they can read Jessie's. You have that great link that you sent me that has like all of your favorites on jessiejarnow.com. So I'll put that on.
Cool. That'd be great.
And yeah, I will put that on, and a link to the book, and yeah, so everyone can read more. And there's so much good stuff. So I just thank you so much for coming on and talking and sharing, and I hope we get to meet in person. I'm sure we will at some point, both being up here in the Northeast, and good music coming along, and hopefully be able to catch a song together.
Yeah, that would be sweet. That would be super fun.
So let's sign off with a really special version of Box of Rain. So tell everyone about this, and then we'll play this and say goodbye.
Yeah. So I came across this version of Box of Rain, I think around the time I started hosting a radio show. I host a radio show every week on WFMU, which is a freeform radio station here in the New York area, where it's non-commercial. I can play pretty much whatever I want. And this is it's a Robert Hunter solo record called Jack of Roses, where he plays a bunch of Dead tunes, which is something he doesn't usually do on his solo albums. And I really love Robert Hunter solo stuff, or maybe not every single last bit of it. But Tales of the Great Rum Runners, his first solo album, produced with Garcia, is really, really beautiful. And actually lately I've been very into this compilation that somebody made called Gravity's Rainbow, which you can find on archive.org, which is a collection of all of the original songs that he debuted and played on tour in the years after the Dead ended. And there's some really great kind of lost Hunter tunes there. But this is the first song on Jack of Roses. It's his version of Box of Rain. And it's, it doesn't, it's Box of Rain. You can tell it's Box of Rain, and it's not the Dead version, and it's not the Dead arrangement. And I just really love what it brings to it. And his voice doesn't.
It's kind of haunting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's almost got like a haunting edge to it. Like it's sort of, there's a darkness around it.
Yeah.
Would you say?
His voice can be a little bit of an acquired taste for some Deadheads, but
maybe that's.
But I do think on this album and this song specifically, there's this sweetness that kind of comes through that I think it's sort of a little bit less gruff than I think he can be on other recordings. And I think that puts across this song in a real way. I mean, after all, he's the guy who wrote these words, and it's, you can so often associate the Dead lyrics with Garcia because he's singing them, or Phil or Bobby or whoever's singing them. But it's always, to me, it's always a really poignant reminder to think about the fact that it was Robert Hunter who wrote them, and that he's got his way of phrasing these things, and obviously, his own meanings for these songs that I'm sure are, completely personal and beyond anything we can really reckon with. But sort of the fact that you can hear his interpretation of how this stuff, of how these words and melodies fit together is pretty special. And this version of Box of Rain has been a staple on mix CDs and playlists of mine for years. I don't think it's probably on Spotify or anything like that. But yeah, it's great. It's great stuff. And the rest of Jack of Roses is worth hearing too, if you can track it down.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And I mean, he's, it's poetry. I mean, ultimately, I was talking about poetry with a friend the other day and how I don't really follow much poetry. And I'm like, well, but lyrics, which is poetry. And he is, I mean, he's written some of the most beautiful stuff. So so I'm going to play this, and then that we'll kind of sign off with this. So again, thank you so much, and everybody enjoy, and we'll catch you soon.
Cool.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Look out of any window Maybe the sun is shining, birds are winging, or rain is falling from a heavy sky. What do you want me to do for you, to see you through? For this is all a dream we dreamed one afternoon long ago. Walk out of any doorway, feel your way like the day before. Maybe you'll find direction around some corner where it's been waiting to meet you. What do you want me to do to watch for you while you're sleeping? Well, please don't be surprised when you find me dreaming too. Look out of any eyes you find I can see into another day. I know it's all been seen before through other eyes on other days while going home. What do you want me to do for you, to see you through? It's all a dream one afternoon long ago. Walking to splintered sunlight, itch your way through dead dreams never found. Maybe you're tired and broken, your tongue is twisted with words half-spoken and thoughts unclear. What do you want me to do for you, to see you through? A box of rain will ease the pain, love, see you through. Just a box of rain, wind, and water. Believe it if you need it. If you don't, just pass it on. Sun and shower, wind, rain, in and out your window like a moth for a flame. Just a box of rain, I don't know who put it there. Leave it if you need it, or leave it if you dare. But it's just a box of rain, or a ribbon for your hair. Such a long, long time to be gone, and a short time to be there.